Welcome to UK election special episode. Today we have a prominent British politician as our special guest. He was the leader of the Conservative Party and opposition leader from 2001 to 2003 and Secretary of State for Work and Pension from 2010 to 2016, and he is currently an MP of Chingford and Woodford Green. Right Honourable Iain Duncan Smith. Welcome to our show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You must have heard about our channel.
I have.
This is a South Indian channel.
Yes, indeed,
watched by Kerala people.
Yes, very much so. I have, yeah, and I gather it's a very successful channel.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. This channel itself started about 5 years ago, and we've been running another channel for 17 years now. That's called Asianet Europe.
Yes. In fact, interestingly enough, I think there is a connection here because my family on my father's side lived and worked in India for generations.
Okay.
And in fact, my grandfather, I think he ended up as deputy governor in
Madras, I think.
In Madras. That's
Madras.
Right. And ended up, he's buried up in Ooty.
Ooty, I said.
Down south, and he actually spoke fluent Tamil, which is very unusual
that's
in
true.
those days, back in the 30s. And when partition took place and India got independence, he didn't come back. He stayed there. He said this is his country.
Oh, okay.
So that's why he's buried there.
Oh, okay. I think you have a good connection with India as well.
I do. I love it. I did business there.
Very nice.
It's a great country.
Very nice to know as well. Okay. I came to this country 40 years ago. About 16 or 17 years ago, you are going to become the Prime Minister of this country. Okay. Now you led the leadership election for Boris Johnson and he became the Prime Minister.
That's right.
What are the common factors between both of you?
Well, Boris and I get on very well. We are very good friends. I like him. He's good fun to be with. He's also a highly intelligent man and a very cultured man. He understands and enjoys culture. And he's very good at reaching out to audiences of people that don't normally think about voting Conservative.
Okay.
And that's really important. So I wanted to help him become the leader, to become the Prime Minister, and then to go on to win an election. And so far, we've done them all except yet win the election, which we must do.
Okay, now as you know that this election itself is happening because of this Brexit. Okay, about I think 2016, people of this country made a decision to come out of EU. I mean Brexit. Because of that, we lost 2 prime ministers.
Yes.
And we are heading for another election.
Yes.
And we always say we are the longest serving continuous parliament in the world. Our democratic system is the model for the whole world.
Yes.
And what happened to our democracy?
Well, it's there and it's working, and that's the funny thing about it. The British people, we had an election in 2017, which I didn't think we needed to have. I was clear that we should have delivered Brexit, then had the election.
Yeah.
But the then Prime Minister changed her mind, Theresa May, and decided to have an election. And people didn't want one. It was only a year after the referendum. So the result was we didn't get a good result. We had a very poor election campaign, and we ended up without a dominant position in Parliament. So we had what's called a hung Parliament.
Okay.
As a result of that, throughout the whole of the period that's followed, it meant that we couldn't get any of our business through and couldn't get Brexit done.
Okay.
So now we've come back at this point, having got a deal, we can't get it through the House of Commons. And that's how democracy sometimes works. When the public votes for no overall control, then they now need to realise that that's what happens. Now you need overall control.
Yeah, you are trying to say, basically you are trying to say is, you have a Remain Parliament trying to implement people's vote to Brexit.
Exactly right, and that is the problem. With no overall majority, what's actually happened is most of the MPs in Parliament were voted Remain. People like me represent the minority who voted to leave, but most of the people in the country voted to leave. And so what you have is a Remain-dominated Parliament frustrating the will of the British people, and that cannot go on much longer.
Okay. Now we are heading for another election on 12th of December.
Yes.
It's only a couple of days to go. Will it be a Brexit election?
Yes, this is essentially about getting a majority to deliver Brexit, or as Boris Johnson says, get Brexit done. We can't do anything else till we get Brexit done, and we're ready to go. So we've got the deal, we've negotiated it, now we need people to say, okay, we need a party that is dedicated to getting it done. The Conservatives are the only party. Labour, of course, want to have another referendum, further negotiations, and the danger for Labour is they're also ready to give the Scottish nationalists a referendum on leaving the UK, which would be a disaster.
No, you already done one 2014.
That's exactly it. And that was described by the nationalists as a once in a generation.
That's what they said at that time.
They get pretty small generations, according to them.
I think because that election result, at that time Prime Minister carried forward the Brexit as well, I think.
Yes, absolutely. But
overconfidence, I think.
Well, I think it's time. The British people made a decision.
Yeah.
And I'm a great believer in democracy. And if democracy is to work, it must be seen to work. And that means let's deliver on that vote.
At the moment, are you trying to get 9 more seats for the majority or more than that?
Oh, well, 9 more seats is the minimum that we want, but we'd like to get more. The thing that runs through this election campaign is very important. It is that Jeremy Corbyn himself isn't really trusted by the British people. Not trusted on defence or security, because his whole history has been opposing what British troops do in Northern Ireland or anywhere else, and ultimately still seeing and siding with terrorists. Doesn't matter where they are. He seems to give defence to Russia. He seems to give defence to some of those terrorist groups, and seems to side with them in the Middle East. And of course his recent pronouncements and their views on the issue of Kashmir, where he's clearly taken sides in this, does seem to me to be a very bad idea. Whatever else, we need to help resolve this issue, not decide that one side is right and one side is wrong, which is what he seems to have done. And I think that's not fair on India. And I think it's not fair on their determination to try and resolve this issue. And frankly, I think it's a big mistake, but it's very typical of his approach, I'm afraid, to international relations and to security.
But we'll come back to this Brexit thing. If we don't get the majority as we expected, what will happen to this country? Are we going back to on this acrimonious situation again?
Well, you are. You're going to head into what was the worst of the last 3 years, which is anger, rancor, dispute, delay, and constant prevarication. So all the things that Boris terms up as dither, more delay. We can't afford that. Whatever else, whether people voted Remain or Leave, it's irrelevant now.
That's
what they need to know. Number 1, can we get it done? Number 2, can we get it done within the timescale? Number 3, who is the party and the Prime Minister that will deliver it? And all of those questions are asked, only the Conservative Party can answer them. The others want to delay it, they want to block it, they want to have second referendums, or in the Liberals' case, they want to revoke. That is a disaster for us. And I think anyone watching this needs to recognise this is a very big election, because it decides the future of the UK. And I want to open up new trade links with India, with very many other countries. And there's fantastic opportunity both ways to export goods and services into India. It'd be very beneficial to India. As you know, our service sector is...
once you come out of Brexit, obviously you will be dealing with the rest of the world.
Absolutely.
And India is a very good market.
And I am looking forward, I have to tell you, to re-establishing those strong ties that have bound us, that I'm afraid we loosened once we joined the European Union. I've always felt we're an outward-looking nation. The nature of our Commonwealth and everything else. I'd like to engage much more with the Commonwealth. Actually, interesting, there's more growth in the economies of the Commonwealth than there is in the European Union. So you ask me who's better placed. I think the UK doing good deals with India and others. I was just looking at the value added on bottle of whiskey, for example, in India is very high. What a fantastic marketplace. We get a tariff deal where we go to zero.
That is really
fantastic. People love it.
We have a lot of people who drinks a lot of alcohol.
The Scotch is a very, very popular drink over there.
That's true.
And I'm very keen as a Scotsman to see more of that export.
No, because I can also see the danger of if somebody won't finish this Brexit off as soon as possible, this country can't move forward. Because last 3 years we've been talking about this Brexit. And why it happened? Because European Union, they opened the borders. A lot of people came there, but they didn't know that their end destination was UK. That is why all the immigrants came to this country. That is why all these problems started. That is why our NHS struggled.
Yes, and what we've seen, you're right. It's not that that you have to be anti-migration, because I'm not. I'm a great believer that migration has strengthened the United Kingdom over the years.
Yeah, but that should be controlled migration.
But it's controlled migration.
Yeah.
We had a city, I think it was the size of Newcastle, that was coming in every single year. Now, that means they've got to go somewhere, live somewhere, schooling, effects on the roads, health services, all those services that are required aren't really ready for them, and that puts pressure on communities. So controlled migration, which is migration but at a steady pace, not huge numbers coming in.
Okay. Before the next question, let me introduce my community. As I told you earlier, we are from a state called Kerala.
Yes, I know.
We are the second or third largest Indian community in UK. Our people are scattered all over UK. Majority of them are working in NHS and other professional areas. The second major concern of this country is the NHS. There are lots of talk about NHS, there are a lot of waiting lists and all those things. What are your plans to improve these sort of situations?
Well, the National Health Service has had its budget protected over the years where we had difficulty. Remember, we inherited a complete collapsed economy, a bigger collapse than during the Great Depression in the 1930s.
Yeah.
We ended up with a soaring level of deficit, which feeds the debt. Debt was rising, people were out of work, companies were closing. That was what we inherited. We had to get that under control. We've now got that under control. Deficit down to less than 1%. The debt as a proportion of GDP is falling. So now we can afford to invest more money in these things. So when it comes to the health service, we have a plan to give something in the order of £34 billion a year to the health service, which is a staggering sum of money. The second thing that I would say from here in Chingford, which is really, really good, is we're going to get the £400 million, which is the key bit of the package that they need to rebuild Whipps Cross Hospital, whilst at the same time getting monies for all sorts of other hospitals and projects around the country. So here, I'm over the moon about Whipps Cross Hospital.
Oh, that is your area, yeah.
Well, under Labour, they tried to shut it down about 10 years ago.
Yeah.
We campaigned as a community to stop it. Now we've got the money in. Now they have to get their business case right, but we've underwritten the money, and that's really, really important.
Okay. Last night, I knew that we are having an interview today. So last night, I called some of the people, those who are working in Whipps Cross.
Yes.
I said, Iain Duncan Smith is coming here. Is there any questions to ask? They said their parking problem they've been telling. All the people, those who are working there, they have to pay a lot of money for parking. Do you know about that one? The people have a different tariff to pay for the same parking place?
Yes, they do, and I think this has to be resolved. But of course, the rebuild of Whipps Cross Hospital will give them scope to resolve all of this now. Because they'll get greater space to be able to get better parking for the people that work there. So this plan encompasses all of that. And that's why the 400 million, which was given to Whipps Cross Hospital as part of this plan, is brilliant, really, because it gives them the opportunity to get on and start the building.
Let us talk about the education system.
Yes.
Lots of teenagers are not completing their degree due to high university fees. Anything on your agenda to ease this situation?
Well, the government is looking at it, and they're looking at the interest payments that are necessary, although they don't get high until much later on when people are earning more. And bear in mind, people don't pay for a significant amount of time until they're well over 20,000. So the key element here is that before, the previous scheme under Mr. Blair had them paying at around about £15,000 of earning. That was quite early and a lot of money. We have to fund the universities one way or the other. And the problem has been successive governments doing it through taxation. 2 points are here. One is that lots of people who never went to university then pick up the bill for those who are going to have a better and brighter future because of their university degree. So they have to pay for that. And the second element of governments often reduced the money, made it difficult. So it's very difficult for universities to plan. The third area is that now with a known sum of money, universities can plan, and we've seen the results of that, is that more and more universities have improved themselves, more into research, things like technology, but also, interestingly, the money that's coming to them means that those universities have become, in many cases, world leaders in their fields. And of course, this is very, very important because it means, therefore, the next generation of scientists and academics that will come from these universities will have had the best, if not a better, education. And that's critical. So yes, there are issues around it, but the truth is the money comes from somewhere. And if it doesn't come from there,
Okay.
for the prospects are better for people at university. And then it comes from somebody else. And the last point I want to make is that we now have a higher proportion of people in the low income groups attending university, much higher than ever was the case before. And that's critical as well.
The next one, as you know, that one, the crime rate in this country is soaring like anything. You can see that a lot of incidents happening on the road every day. What are we going to do the policing things?
Well, first of all, the government has now said that we are going to re-employ and/or train 20,000 new police officers, more police officers. Some of them will be brand new, and some will be the others coming back.
Okay.
Which is really important because that gets the numbers right back up, and a place like Chingford and Woodford Green will benefit enormously from the extra police. The second point is we do have a problem at the moment in some of our inner city areas like this with street gangs. Now these street gangs have themselves been essentially ripping communities apart.
Yeah.
In Waltham Forest, we've had murders, shootings, stabbings, because they're turf wars about drugs, and the arrival of the Somali gangs has actually radically changed the levels of violence. We need to get that under control. But at the Centre for Social Justice, which I set up, we looked at how do you stop this, and we came up with a whole series of inquiries about how to break the street gangs. And it's these violent street gangs that have created this culture of violence because they're always warring with each other. So we've said that you need to do the policing to take the leaders out. Then you need to work very closely with people on the ground, community groups, charities, schools, to get the children, the young ones, out of the gangs.
Okay.
And once you remove them and keep them out, and you take out the top guys, the gangs then look like they collapse. But you can't take that for granted. It's constant.
Right. Okay.
Must be done every day, every week, every year, without fail.
So how, basically, how these criminals are getting into this country? That is where the immigration area comes. We need to screen who is coming in and who is going out of this country.
So the government has come up with the next move on this, which is we will screen people coming in and leaving.
Yeah.
Which means now we'll have a check as to whether they left, which has been a vital missing component. To tell us whether so-and-so who had a 6-month visa has gone. Really important. The second thing, we're going to toughen up on the immigration rules. People will only be coming in here if they have a job. They won't be able to receive benefit for a number of years until they've contributed to the system. Up until now, what's happened is that people coming in go straight into the benefits office and claim their benefit.
That's true. Yeah. See, I think this is the only country you don't have a record of who is coming to this country and who is going out of this country. You may have a record of who is coming to this country, but you don't have a record of how many people left this country.
That's a good point. And that's why the government is determined to change that. So what we're looking at now is a count going in and a count going out. And then you match the two together, and if someone was
you know that how many people left here?
Yes, exactly. We haven't been using that figure, so now we need to know what is the position of individuals as they leave. We don't want them sitting around trying to find different ways of
I think the whole problem in this country happened because of these things. Even Brexit happened because of the immigration problem.
Well, it's the scale of the migration.
Yeah.
Very high on the EU side, pretty high on the non-EU side.
Yeah.
But the EU side was on the basis of an open border. That was the problem. So coming in here, very difficult getting checks and balances. We often had to bring in people who got a criminal record who didn't declare it, pose a threat to people, as we've seen in some cases. So my view is that getting control of migration is absolutely critical before you can't be able to do anything else until you've done that. Reduce the numbers that are needed to what they actually need and not what they want to have, and then this will be a big difference. And, we will end up in a situation where we control migration. We have the migration we need. For example, seasonal workers can come in to do farm work, but they must have a ticket to get back. That's the normal way to run it, and it'll be run a bit better. And all of those things will come, and therefore as a result of that, less pressure on communities, less pressure on wages. There was a very good Bank of England report a few years ago that said that the net effect of migration, be it from outside or inside, is that it reduces the wage levels of those inside, and that can't be good.
No, you see, we always hear about these NHS issues. I always wonder, when you make a budget for NHS, for example, if you are making a budget for 100 people,
Yes.
take a small figure, it's not millions of people, 100 people, you are making a budget for 100 people. So you have a budget for 100 people. But you don't know at the end of the day whether 1,000 people are using or 100,000 people are using for that 100 people's budget, because a lot of people coming from all over the place.
Yes,
and using the 100 people's
yes,
cake.
it is a problem because you finance a health service. If you have a very high level of migration, that health service gets used, and that money therefore gets diluted.
Yeah.
And so some people can't get the treatment they want. This is not an anti-migrancy policy.
No,
it's
no,
different.
no.
It's
Understand.
for controlled migration.
Control migration.
So that those coming in have a job, can pay their way, and you don't have to worry about them. And that's really critical for us, and I think we should stick to that. But we do have a requirement to lower the scale of migration, and
Okay.
Boris Johnson has agreed to that, and Priti Patel has been pretty,
Yeah.
but she has been very assiduous in ensuring that the policy work ensures that we do not have more people than we can cope with.
If I say that this sort of migration will destroy the balance of our public service, what will you say?
I think it makes it very difficult for our public services to operate properly if we end up with a migration system that is uncontrolled.
Okay.
Because without controlling it, you don't know how many numbers are coming and leaving.
Okay.
And also, you want people to come for work where they work and contribute, not to come to claim benefits, which has been happening in the past.
That's what is happening.
And we found that in the unskilled level of labour,
Okay.
came in and actually ended up taking more money out of the UK than they put back in. And I think that's an important bit.
Oh,
Nobody
okay.
minds people who earn, pay taxes.
Oh, okay.
And it's when they don't that actually they then put pressure on communities. And that's
Now
the key.
I know that you are running out of time to run around because the election is
Yes,
on
yes,
our
yeah.
doorstep. See, in Chingford and Woodford Green, there is a lot of Malayali or Indian populations here. What will you say to them?
It's very simple.
Yeah.
This election is a choice. It's a choice between a government that wants to complete the Brexit process, not go back or ask a second question, not keep on wanting to delay, but to get this done, Boris Johnson, and then be able to move on to the issues of migration, of policing and crime, to move on to the issues of the health service,
Yeah.
the extra money for Whipps Cross Hospital,
Yeah.
and the extra money going into the budget of some 40 billion.
Okay.
All of those areas plus education are critical areas. There are others as well, defence, getting defence
Yeah.
structure right. Those things can't be achieved
Yeah.
unless we get Brexit done. So this election is about, first and foremost, picking a government that has a majority, can strike through the mess and get Brexit done, and then deliver on our pledges to
Okay.
increase health spending, increase education spending, increase police spending to get 20,000 more police on the streets. Those are very, very important domestic requirements, and we need to get them done, and we can't get them done at the moment.
Okay.
Because of that.
This election is very important for you or Conservative Party altogether to win with a massive majority to come out of this mess. Don't you think so?
As I said, this is an election of a single choice.
Okay.
Who do you want to govern you that can end the chaos, end the mess, end the dither, end the delay? It has to be Boris Johnson. We are the only party pledged to deliver on the Brexit vote that
Okay.
we had in 2016. Both the other parties, Labour and Liberal, simply want to delay and keep you in
Okay.
and make it impossible for us to leave. That has got to be wrong,
Okay.
and voting Conservative this election is absolutely critical that people realise
Okay.
that only by voting critically at this election for those who will deliver Brexit, Boris Johnson, the Conservative Party, will deliver that decision. So that's how critical it is.
Okay. Instead of dividing the country, we need to bring people together. Let us make 2020 the year of prosperity and growth. Wish you all success
Thank you very much
on
indeed.
this election.
And I agree with you. I think that I'm optimistic. I'm incredibly optimistic about our future. I think this is a great country. It's full of a diverse and great population
Okay.
with all the skills and the talents that you could possibly imagine. We should be inspired by the idea of a Britain released once we leave the European Union, released to do these trade deals, released to re-establish our incredible strong links with the Commonwealth and these countries of great growth that we have been with for hundreds of years, and established real relationships, links, ties, families. All of this we have to offer the world a huge amount. Leadership again in things like free trade and settling these issues around security. We should be there in the forums of these in our rightful place. And by getting Brexit done, we can do all of that. Release the talents of Britain at last. Have to vote Conservative to get Brexit done.
Oh, thank you for coming. Wish you all success, and wish you all success.
Thank you.
Thank you
very much indeed.
Thank you.